Hello there, friend. Where are you tonight? Curled up under a warm blanket? Have you turned off the lights yet, let the glow fade slowly, the room growing quiet, still? Before you drift off to sleep, let me tell you a story. Not a fairy tale, not a myth, but a real story. A story about us, from a long, long time ago. Leave a little comment for the night? Now, close your eyes and follow me back. Back to the fireside, back to the forest, back to a time before the first cities. This is what life was like before the first cities, 10,000 BCE. The wind dragged itself lazily across the valley floor, cool and damp with dew and whatever had died in the night. A cloud of gnats hung like a mistake over a patch of dung, and near it a shape began to stir a person, or at least a person by 10,000 BCE standards, lean fur-wrapped hair like tangled grass, and crusted with the dust of 5 days, and no soap. Her name, if you could call it that, was something like Nar, but names were more about tone than spelling. She blinked twice, scratched her hip with great commitment, and looked around. Others stirred slowly nearby, 8 of them. A small competent tribe, or band, depending on which anthropologist you asked 12,000 years later. They had no written rules, no chores chart, and no idea the concept of morning would one day involve alarm clocks and oat milk lattes. But instinctively, they knew the sun meant time to move. There was no breakfast. There was, however, a shared hunger. It wasn't the kind of dramatic hunger that makes modern poets feel misunderstood. It was just basic. An absence. A note in the belly. You should probably choose something today, or you'll pass out and become owl food. Nar stood up. Dirt fell off her like she'd been rolled in dry cake batter. She stretched, yawned, and checked the small woven pouch by her side. Still had the sharp flint shard she liked. Still had the dried root she sometimes chewed because it made her forget she hated the dried root. Nearby, Gruck squatted with the kind of focus normally reserved for monks or toddlers. He was watching a beetle dig itself a grave. Whether he was contemplating life, death, or if beetles were tasty, no one would ever know, least of all Grook. The band had camped under a shelf of rock, which had the rare advantage of keeping them dry, and the snakes moderately uninterested. Their fire from the night before had turned to ash and memory. Smell still lingered: smoke, singed bone, and the vague but permanent odour of mammoth fat. By now, 2 others had woken Ro and Taka. Ro had a limp from a bad encounter with a jealous bison. Taka had a face like someone had tried to draw a man using only rocks, but both were sharp-eyed and quiet. They nodded at Nar in the unspoken way of people who shared sleeping lice. The first task of the day was always the same: survive. But more specifically, survive long enough to find food. There was no fridge, no rations, no spare energy for complaining about intermittent fasting. The group's mental inventory, shaped by generations of hunger, tracked the edible landscape. Berries northeast, nuts under the old tree with the broken branch, roots near the bend in the stream, but careful, because last time there was a snake pretending to be a root. Nar, Ro, and a younger girl named Siku set off with baskets made from woven reeds and hope. The others would pack up what little they had and meet them by the sun shadow of the eastern hill. They always moved. Staying still was a luxury they couldn't afford, and besides, the dung pile meant big animals had passed nearby. Big animals were either lunch or the reason you became lunch. The walk was quiet, broken by the occasional grunt or exaggerated sigh. Birds chirped with irritating cheer. Somewhere distant, a monkey screamed at its own reflection. Nar led the group through tall grass, her feet hard and dark from years of walking barefoot. Shoes, if you can believe it, existed in theory, but the effort it took to tan and sew hide into a crude sandal, most just let their souls become one with the world. She paused under a tree. Her eyes flicked to the ground. Recent prints. Hoofed. Maybe antelope. Fresh dung too, still steaming like nature's latte foam. That was good. Or bad. Hard to tell yet. Siku, the youngest, stopped to pick a few low berries and promptly dropped them after finding a worm in one. She made a face that, despite the millennia, is still instantly recognizable today, the universal ewe. Na squinted up at the canopy. Some nuts were almost ready. She shimmied up the tree with the grace of someone who'd done it every season of her life. Up top, she balanced and twisted off a few clusters, letting them fall to the ground with soft thuds. Siku scrambled to gather them. Ro sniffed one, shrugged, and popped it in his mouth. Back near the makeshift camp, the others were preparing to leave. Tools were checked. Water skins made from hollowed animal stomachs were slung over shoulders. One woman, Effa, braided a strip of sinew while humming something that wasn't a song but had rhythm. Grook had caught a frog and was trying to decide if it was worth the trouble. It wasn't. He tossed it. The frog, unaware of its brief audition for dinner, hopped away gratefully. The sun had risen higher now. Heat began to press against the land like a giant's hand. Bugs stirred. Sweat formed. The smell of human effort mixed with dust and grass. There were no baths, no showers. Clean was relative. You smelled like what you rolled in and what you ate, and everyone had long since stopped noticing. By mid-morning, the foraging trio returned. Their baskets were far from full but not empty. Enough to keep everyone moving. Enough to keep complaints limited to grunts and minor shoves. They didn't talk much. Language existed, of course, but in a loose, slippery form. Grunts, gestures, and sounds conveyed everything they needed. Danger there. Food here. I saw something shiny. Don't touch my stick. It worked. They gathered again by the sun-shadowed rock, checked for stragglers, just Grook, who'd wandered off to pee and forgot to come back, and moved on. Feet hit earth in quiet rhythm. The line of them curved like a shadow along the hill's edge. Behind them, only footprints and a few strands of hair stuck in tree bark told the story of their existence. Nothing permanent, no houses, no monuments, not even a good old-fashioned cave drawing. Just another morning before breakfast had a name. The ground beneath their feet was a blend of crushed grasses, hardened mud, and the occasional sharp pebble that made even the most rugged of heels flinch. They didn't have the luxury of socks or thick soles. Their soles were their shoes tough, calloused pads grown from a lifetime of walking on everything but smooth. Every step told a story. The band moved like a loosely strung necklace of limbs and hides, weaving through trees and sunlit patches without any urgent choreography, yet somehow always keeping a general direction. They followed the dirt trail carved over seasons not by tools or wheels but by repetition. Human feet, animal hooves, and memory etched it into the earth. Na led again, still chewing her root like it might someday become delicious. Siku trailed her, looking under every bush like the forest owed her a secret. Behind them, Grook finally reappeared from the direction of absolutely nowhere, holding a stick like he'd just invented it. Paths weren't marked with signs, but the land had its language. The bend of a tree limb that had once been clawed by a bear. A patch of white rocks that glowed like bones. The smell of standing water just ahead rank, mosquito-heavy, but necessary. This was how direction worked. Landmarks, smells, the slope of land beneath their steps, and the way the wind hit your face when you walked the right way. They didn't need maps because they were the maps. Stories passed down in grunts and gestures helped them remember. Follow the stream until you hear the tree that whistles. That was a real thing, a half-dead tree that creaked with the sound of an old man sighing whenever the wind hit it just right. A younger Na had once called it the sad tree. The name stuck, as much as anything could stick in a language that sounded like a series of mildly annoyed animal sounds. They crossed a shallow ravine, hopping over slick stones. Siku slipped and caught herself on a branch, laughing. Grook, not to be outdone by a child, attempted a dramatic jump and promptly landed on his tailbone with a dull thud that echoed through the ravine like a cosmic prank. The others didn't laugh, not out loud, but there was a subtle shoulder tremble from Ro, the kind that spoke volumes. Beyond the ravine, the terrain shifted. Taller grasses, drier soil, less shade. It meant they were getting closer to the open plain where deer sometimes grazed in the late morning. Unaware they were part of a menu. Na slowed. Her body spoke before her mouth. Arms half raised, back bowed slightly, feet quieter now. The others followed suit like a choreographed hush. A fresh print lay in the dirt. Not human, not hoofed either. 3 clawed toes, pressed deep into the earth. Something bird-like. A big bird. Too big. They all stared at it for a moment, before resuming their slow, careful steps now with extra neck swivels and more frequent sniffs of the air. You'd think life without cities would be peaceful. In a way it was. Peaceful like floating on a log in crocodile-infested waters. It was quiet, yes, but the quiet was always watching you. They made it to a cluster of trees that formed a rough crescent. Here, they paused. It was familiar ground. This was a known rest spot, a seasonal way station. Not permanent, but memory smooth. Bark was carved with ancient scratches, not as art, but as unintentional marks of living. A pit under one tree held the remains of fire's long-gone charred bone, ash, stone blackened by stories and meat. The group settled in the grass. Some sat. Others half lay, one eye open, like predators with performance anxiety. Siku played with a stick she decided was now a snake. Grook watched her, as if trying to understand what part of the stick's behaviour suggested. Snake. Na chewed thoughtfully, and let her gaze drift to the trees, then the hills beyond. Her mind wandered not in words, but in patterns. Which hill had the deer trail? Had the wind changed? Was that buzzing sound getting louder? The way she calculated space and sound was intuitive, almost animal. This wasn't mindfulness. This was survival-fueled mental math. Ro was already on his back, hands folded behind his head, watching clouds the way philosophers would do in another 10,000 years. He exhaled loudly, and for a moment, no one spoke. They stayed that way for an hour, maybe 2. Time was measured by shadow lengths and the growling of stomachs. When hunger grew louder than the wind, they moved again, this time in a wide arc toward the western slope, where wild tubers sometimes broke the surface like buried treasure. Na stopped now and then to dig gently with her flint shard. Dirt caked her fingers. She sniffed at a root, rubbed it on her arm to check for itch, then passed it to Gruk. He sniffed, nodded like an expert, and immediately tried to eat it without cleaning it. Classic Gruk. Siku found a patch of mushrooms. Tiny caps, brown with a dusty fuzz. She held one up questioningly. Ro squinted. He made the universal gesture for maybe death, maybe laughing fits. She dropped them. Hunger had a way of making even suspicious things seem delicious. But they'd all learned some the hard way, that food could be a trickster. A plant one day could kill you the next, depending on whether a goat had peed on it or if it was touched by the wrong dew. By mid-afternoon they had enough roots and berries to justify a return to the group. The sun had begun to lower, and the path home shimmered in its heat. Their feet, dusty, nicked and noble, carried them back without pause. They reached the others at the edge of a sparse forest. The group had built a quick shelter from branches and animal hide, a lean-to for shade, not permanence. As they laid out the day's meagre bounty, a soft wind picked up, stirring dust across their toes. To anyone watching from the sky, they'd be specks moving, sitting, stretching, scratching. But to themselves, they were the centre of the world. A world walked barefoot, a world memorized by muscle. In their own way, they were cartographers of the earth, not with ink, but with skin and step, and the deep, unspoken memory of how the dirt felt between their toes. The sky had started changing colour again. The blue was now tinged with that dusty orange that meant 2 things. Mosquitoes were on the rise, and it was time to eat something, or at least try. The fire pit was already smoking faintly. Ro knelt beside it, carefully feeding dry twigs into its heart with the kind of reverence normally reserved for altars. Fire wasn't just warmth, it was safety. It was cooked food instead of parasites. It was the only Netflix they had. Everyone gathered around it at night, not to be entertained, but to stay alive and share warmth. And, let's be honest, to low-key judge each other's stories. Na squatted close, eyes on the flickering centre. She rubbed 2 stones together, in a practiced rhythm, coaxing sparks into the dead grass pile. There was no drama to it, no triumphant grunt when the flame took. Just a tired, smoky nod. Gruk, appointed meat handler, not by skill but by the simple fact that he always volunteered, held up the day's big catch. A rabbit. slightly squashed from being bludgeoned with a rock, but still more or less intact. Gruck looked at it like a chef, studying a chicken breast, only significantly hairier. He had zero intention of sharing the brain, which he believed gave him dreams about the future. Everyone else believed it gave him farts that could kill small rodents. Ro started slicing. He was meticulous with the flint knife, pulling the skin back in clean strips while Siku watched, fascinated and slightly grossed out. Na helped by separating edible bits from don't even try it bits. She once made the mistake of roasting rabbit gallbladder, and the smell alone had made 2 people cry. By the time the meat sizzled over the fire, heads had drawn closer. The scent of cooked protein could silence even the pettiest of prehistoric grudges. This was where they socialized, faces lit by fire, bodies wrapped in hide, and bellies growling like offended spirits. There were no formal rituals, no toasts, no chants, but there was the grunt of approval when the meat was finally passed around. Everyone understood it. Gruck took a large bite and stared dramatically into the flames, as if unlocking ancient secrets. His voice dripped fake wisdom. Good fire, good meat, sky still up. Brilliant, murmured Ro, rolling his eyes so hard he nearly saw last week. But jokes, even bad ones, were part of the evening rhythm. After the chewing died down, the talk began. Not talk in the modern sense, no gossip about neighbours or arguments about politics, just fragments of things remembered, dreamed, or imagined. Na spoke of a deer she'd seen years ago with a twisted horn, like a tree branch growing from its head. It had vanished into fog, never to be seen again. Was it real? Probably. But possibly not. Didn't matter. It made a good fire story. Aoife added one about a bird that sang at night just one note, like a broken flute. She claimed it followed her for weeks after her brother died. A sign, maybe. Or maybe just a bird with bad timing. There were always a few half-lies told under the stars. Not to deceive, but to entertain, or to make something frightening feel less sharp. Stories weren't just for amusement, they were how you learned. Like the time Siku asked about the scars on Ro's leg. He launched into the tale of the bison who hated his face, and the poor decision to poke it with a spear made from an old stick and too much confidence. The story took a long detour into why you always check wind direction before sneaking up on something that outweighs your entire tribe. By then the stars had appeared, one by one at first, like shy guests at a party. Then suddenly, the whole sky was full. There was no light pollution, no headlights, no lamps, just starlight raw and untouched. It made the whole band seem tiny, and yet more real. Siku lay back on the dirt, her head on Na's leg, counting stars, until she forgot which ones she'd already counted. "What are they?" she whispered. Ro said, "Fires from the sky people." Gruck said, "Eyes of giant owls." Na said nothing. She liked not knowing. The stars didn't need explanations. They were old friends who just didn't talk much. As the flames died down, bones were tossed into the fire to crack and pop. A few seeds were chewed absently. One particularly unlucky beetle found itself mistaken for a nut and then promptly spit out. No one saw who did it, but the sound of disgusted coughing narrowed it down. Eventually, silence took over. Not heavy silence, but the gentle, sleepy kind. A few wandered off to sleep beneath trees. Others curled into cloaks of animal hide right where they sat. There was no bedtime. Sleep came when the body demanded it. Only one always stayed up just a little longer. Tonight, it was Aoife. She had a sharp ear, good for listening to wind and whispers. She poked at the embers, watching shadows dance on her fingers. Beyond the trees, something rustled. Probably just a fox. Maybe something worse. But the fire was still warm, and her spear was nearby. Firelight. Full bellies. Stars above. For a moment, everything was safe. Tomorrow might bring a storm, a lion, or another day of foraging disappointment. But for now, the only danger was Grook's gastrointestinal response to rabbit brain, and even that could be managed, as long as you slept upwind. Morning returned, as it always did, with the lazy confidence of something that didn't need to prove itself. The fire had died down to a warm patch of ash, and dew clung to every surface like nature's unpaid janitor had come by overnight. Nar sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes with the back of her hand, a smear of charcoal still on her cheek. Somewhere nearby, Gruck was already awake, humming tunelessly and poking the same beetle from yesterday with a stick, possibly trying to flirt with it. Romance. Love before cities didn't involve sonnets, scented oils, or long walks on the beach, unless the beach was where you had to drag water back from. Relationships were more like mutual survival pacts, with the occasional bonus round of physical affection and shared lice. Nar wasn't with anyone, not officially, not in the sense that later societies would understand. But she and Ro had a rhythm, a familiarity. They shared meat sometimes, and he always handed her the slightly less burnt portion of whatever they roasted, which, in this timeline, was practically a wedding ring. Ro, for his part, knew better than to call attention to it. Affection wasn't something you announced, it was something you quietly didn't mess up. He'd once carved a piece of wood into a vaguely flower-like shape and casually tossed it toward her feet. She didn't pick it up, but she didn't throw it away either. That counted for something. Siku was fascinated by it all. The subtleties, the confusing rules. She asked Aoife, who had the calm demeanour of someone who'd seen way too much love drama unfold around poorly cooked fish. "Why do people stick together?" Siku asked, mostly just moving her mouth and grunting out the sounds that sort of meant those words. Aoife considered. Then she said, "So they don't get eaten while sleeping." It was blunt, but not untrue. The bonds in a group like this weren't about finding soulmates or settling down with 2 goats and a fenced-in garden. This was about strategic intimacy. Who could help you carry things? Who would chase away hyenas while you peed? Who wouldn't abandon you when your foot got infected and puffed up like an overcooked root? That said, affection wasn't entirely absent. There were touches, looks, soft sounds made in the dark, crude jokes whispered between people lying just a bit too close, and sometimes the rustle of furs and low giggles signaled something more, nothing elaborate, just 2 people, tangled up under the stars, trying to make some sense of the mess that was being human. Nar and Ro shared one such moment not long after the group began moving again. The sun was high, the trail dusty. They stopped to rest beneath a knotted tree that looked like it had seen things it refused to discuss. Siku wandered off to chase dragonflies, and Gruk was busy inventing a song about a rock. Ro sat beside Nar without speaking, handing her a shard of dried root. They chewed in silence, eyes on the horizon. Then, very quietly, he nudged his knee against hers. She glanced at him. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. She leaned a little closer. That was the entire courtship. Done. Sealed. Possibly eternal. Possibly not. There were no ceremonies. No feathers exchanged or ceremonial mud baths. Just time, proximity, and the occasional nod that meant, "I'll try not to die. You do the same." Babies, when they arrived, weren't exactly surprises, but they also weren't predicted with much certainty. No one tracked ovulation. There were no calendars, no carved moons on bone. Well, okay, not in this group. But when a belly started growing and the usual vomiting started, people just adapted. Parenting was communal. The mother did the main work, of course, carrying, birthing, feeding. But once the kid was out, everyone took turns making sure it didn't roll into a fire or wander into the mouth of a sleeping lion. There was no concept of my child, so much as our responsibility. And sex, while not taboo, was still treated with a kind of casual mystery. It happened. Sometimes it led to babies. Sometimes it didn't. The connection between cause and effect was there, sort of, but it hadn't been pinned down with the confidence of modern biology. Still, there was a growing suspicion. Spend enough nights wrapped around someone, and soon you were carrying a little version of them that screamed for no reason and pooped with alarming frequency. Aoife had 3 children, each with different fathers. She couldn't name all of them, and she didn't particularly care to. What mattered was that they were alive, clever, and able to climb trees faster than any predator could follow. That was success. One night, as the group circled around a fresh fire, with meat roasting and the air thick with the smell of fat and ash. Gruck told a truly terrible story about a man who'd tried to marry a fish. It made little sense, but had everyone snorting with laughter. Na leaned into Ro's shoulder. He rested his chin briefly on her head. No words, just contact. In the dark, beyond the reach of the firelight, Aoife nursed her youngest. Tarka sat close to her, not the father probably, but singing a quiet melody nonetheless. Siku lay beside Gruk, pretending to be asleep while giggling at his snores. Love wasn't a structured thing, it wasn't built like a house. It was more like smoke, shifting, ungraspable but present. Some of it lasted, some of it didn't. Sometimes people stayed together until the next river crossing. Sometimes they wandered off separately and joined new groups. There were no locks, no laws, no judgment. Just the strange ancient truth. Even in the dirt and danger, people still wanted to be close, still sought warmth, still reached for one another, half smiling in the firelight, whispering nonsense, and dreaming of lives that were never boring even if they kind of were. The sun was hot enough to make rocks sweat. That's how Na described it anyway, as she wiped her forehead with the back of her hand and squinted at the horizon like it had personally wronged her. The group was halfway through their day's travel, maybe less, maybe more. Time wasn't something you counted so much as felt in your bones, like an approaching storm or the regret of eating unfamiliar berries. They'd been walking across a wide patch of dry grassland. Beautiful, sure, in that endless what-if-something jumps out at us kind of way. A golden sea of tall blades rustling in the wind, concealing everything and nothing at once. Gruck walked in the back, mostly so if something attacked, it would eat him first. This wasn't agreed upon, just understood. He hummed a tune that may or may not have been an attempt at bird language. Na led up front, as usual, eyes scanning, ears twitching at every crunch, flap or sneeze. Siku, full of reckless optimism, tried to catch a grasshopper and nearly fell into a badger hole. Again, Aoife pulled her back gently, sighing. Then it happened. The smell, it drifted across the breeze like a warning wrapped in rotting meat and fierce sweat. A scent so particular, so universally understood among the long-legged species of Earth, that it bypassed logic and drilled straight into instinct. Predator. Every spine in the group stiffened. The air changed. The wind felt colder somehow, even though the sun hadn't moved. Na raised her hand. Everyone froze. The grass trembled a few lengths ahead. Not with the playful swish of a bird or rabbit. This was the careful push of something big, heavy, calculating. A low growl slithered across the grass. Short, deep, like thunder got bored and crouched behind a bush. Gruck whispered, "That's not a rabbit." Brilliant déduction. Then they saw it. First, the ears rounded and twitching. Then eyes, gold and unreadable. Then the sleek, muscular body of something that should not be this quiet. A large feline, not quite a lion. Not quite anything you'd want closer than a memory. It moved with that awful grace predators always have, no wasted motion, no sound, no doubt. The group didn't scream. They didn't run. Running was an advertisement for, "I am delicious and confused." Instead, they began the slow shift. The gathering of weapons, spears, stones, courage. Na reached for her flint blade. Ro stepped forward with a long branch he'd sharpened on one end, not because it was effective, but because it gave the illusion of readiness. The cat watched, unblinking. It knew the rules. They weren't a herd. They were a group. A group could fight back, and more importantly, a group might hurt it. Predators didn't fear death as much as they feared injury. One bad gash and a hunter became a corpse. Siku was behind Aoife, small enough to be a snack. The cat knew it. Everyone knew it. It crept a little closer. Aoife hissed, loud and sharp, like a snake with a migraine. It startled the cat just slightly. Its ears flattened. Gruck threw a rock and missed everything except the tension. Na, heart thudding, bent and slapped the tall grass with both hands. The sound was sudden, chaotic. Ro followed suit, shouting gibberish. The others joined in. The entire group became a symphony of noise, movement, and violence on hold. And just like that, the cat hesitated, calculated, decided it wasn't worth the scars. With a twitch of its tail, it turned and vanished into the grass, like a ghost retreating from memory. Silence returned, loud and shaking. They waited a long breath before anyone moved. Siku asked, very softly, "Did it blink?" Gruk said, "No, but I did, twice." Everyone exhaled, which, after the tension, sounded like a herd collapsing. This wasn't the first close call, and it wouldn't be the last. The world in 10,000 BCE wasn't a safe place, not even for the ones who considered themselves near the top of the food chain. They weren't. They were just clever meat, with tools. As they regrouped under a cluster of low trees, they checked their supplies and each other. No injuries, no panic, just elevated heartbeats and the subtle scent of fear sweat which was about to get worse. Because that's when the birds went silent. And when birds go silent, it's never to be polite. Na looked toward the distant tree line. There was movement again, but not feline. Larger, lower to the ground. Boar. A whole troop of them. Now, boar weren't predators per se, but they were aggressive, territorial, and dumb enough to charge a tree. And unfortunately, they had recently been chased out of another group's hunting area and were cranky about it. The boars didn't charge right away, they just glared. If pigs could scowl, this group would have sued everyone in sight. Ro raised his arms. "Again?" Na nodded, muttering, "They always come in groups." Effa had already climbed halfway up a tree, holding Siku like a screaming fruit. Gruk was halfway through figuring out if playing dead worked on boars, when one of them huffed and began a slow, stompy walk toward him. But just like that blessedly, and for reasons no one would ever know, the boars turned around and sulked off. Maybe it was the fire scent still clinging to their clothes. Maybe it was Gruk's terrifying body odour. Whatever it was, the group was spared. Again. Eventually they found a rocky outcrop to rest beneath. The sun dipped lower, finally deciding to stop grilling them. Everyone sat down in slow relief. Ro, picking grass from his cloak, said, "We should just make friends with the cats." Na shook her head. "Can't trust anything that stares without blinking." "Like Gruk?" "A pauser." "Exactly." Laughter returned, a little shaky, but real, because danger never truly left. It just paused, hid behind a bush, waited until someone forgot to look over their shoulder. That was the reality of life in a world without fences, firearms, or a neighbour with a loud dog. You smelled danger before you saw it. You felt it in the hairs on your arms, in the stillness of birds, in the quiet between two heartbeats. But sometimes, if you were lucky, you laughed it off before sunset. By the time the sun finished licking the horizon goodnight, the group had settled into a grove of gnarled trees that looked like they'd once fought each other for sunlight. The earth here was softer, rich with rotted leaves and forgotten animal droppings. Not the most glamorous spot, but cozy enough for a band of nomads who graded comfort on a curve. Na crouched beside Ro, sharpening her flint blade against a flat rock. Sparks didn't fly, nothing dramatic, just the soft scrape of stone on stone, a sound as ancient as skin. She didn't need the blade for anything particular at the moment, but idle hands invited insects. Tools were everything, and not just sharp, pokey tools for hunting or skinning. There were scraping tools, chopping tools, digging sticks, nut bashers, shell priers, and a long, slightly bent bone used exclusively to fish honey out of stubborn hives because, as prehistoric wisdom went, honey was worth the bee stings, the angry swatting, and the very real chance of falling out of a tree in front of your crush. They had no word for technology, but make no mistake, they were deep in it. The world around them had been hacked, poked, tested and prodded until even the rocks had purposes. Take Gruk, for example. A man who, on the surface, seemed mostly comprised of hair, teeth, and bad ideas. Yet he had recently fashioned a fish trap out of split reeds and mammoth sinew. The contraption looked like an underwater basket-weaving project gone rogue, but it worked. One trout swam in and, thanks to a clever funnel design, couldn't figure out how to get out. Gruk was now a smug, fish-based millionaire in his own mind. Ro had once invented a sling using a strip of hide and part of a bird's leg. It had taken him the better part of 2 weeks and 5 ruined attempts, but he finally cracked it. With a little twist of the wrist and a stone the size of a walnut, he could bean a rabbit from 20 paces away. Of course, the first few tries had resulted in him slapping himself squarely in the face, but those memories were now considered educational. Even Na had her own moment of brilliance. After a particularly traumatic encounter with a stinging insect that may or may not have been possessed, she figured out that smearing certain crushed herbs on her skin reduced the bug attacks significantly. She couldn't pronounce the plant's name. It had no name, but she knew its scent, its shape, and its blessed magic. The others began copying her, with mixed results. Ro rubbed poison ivy on his thighs by accident and spent 3 days walking like he'd been kicked by a goat. Inventions didn't come from genius or divine inspiration. They came from sheer, stubborn boredom and necessity. When you spend your days walking, waiting, and trying not to die, you start messing with stuff, poking holes in things, tying strings to rocks, smashing one object into another until it does something. That's how dirt tech evolved. Not with grandeur, but with persistence and mild curiosity. One afternoon, Siku found a smooth rock with a groove running down its centre. She filled it with a sticky berry mash, mashed it with another rock, and declared she'd invented flat food. Aoife, ever supportive, took a bite and immediately regretted it, but praised the technique. Later that evening, while the wind murmured through the leaves and the fire cracked politely, Ro held up a strange object. It was a large shell tied to a hollow bone, filled with pebbles. When shaken, it made a satisfying clatter, not quite a rattle, not quite a drum. The sound had no purpose. It didn't attract food. It didn't repel predators. But when he shook it, everyone looked up, smiled, and waited for him to do it again. "Sound tool," he said. Gruck blinked. "For what?" Ro shrugged. "Why not?" They passed it around, each person taking a turn to shake, tap, or spin it. Soon, Aoife began clapping rhythmically. Siku stomped her feet in something that looked like a seizure but might have been dancing. Na smiled, leaning into the firelight, and added a soft beat with a pair of sticks. It didn't do anything, but it meant something. Maybe joy, maybe proof that their hands could create more than wounds and survival. Later that week, Ro used the same shell to store water. Multi-purpose, very efficient, very boring. But those small tools, those bits of progress, were inching humanity towards something big, though none of them knew it. At one point, Grook had the idea to sharpen 2 sticks at both ends, then lash them together to make a double-ended spear. He presented it with theatrical flair. Na examined it, spun it, and handed it back. "You made a pokey stick with extra pokey." Gruck beamed. To them, each object told a story not because it was impressive, but because it came from someone's hands. That digging stick? That was the one Tucker made after losing his last one in a creek full of slippery rocks. The one Ro carved? It had a notch from where Siku used it to draw stick figures in the mud. Nothing was disposable. Everything was patched, rewrapped, repurposed. Even broken flint was saved for scraping bark or tenderizing roots. Bones became spoons, whistles, hooks. Hides became bags, cloaks, or crude hammocks. Even dung had a role. It was dried and burned, used in signalling smoke or as a sort of proto-deodorant for particularly pungent skins. Yes, you read that right. Dung, again. At night, under the stars, surrounded by these crude miracles, Na stared at the simple spear beside her. Its tip was chipped. Its shaft was wrapped in sinew that had once been a rabbit tendon. It wasn't fancy, it wasn't elegant, but it had fed her, defended her, given her something to hold on long walks when thoughts ran wild. It wasn't just a tool, it was a piece of her. In the modern world, people would one day forget what it was like to invent out of nothing, to shape survival from whatever was lying nearby. But Na, Ro, Gruck, and the rest of the group didn't need history books. They were the history. Every chipped stone, every bent stick, every baffling fish trap. Proof that boredom and hunger are the true parents of invention. The next morning smelled like smoke, damp grass, and unresolved tension. The fire had burned low, leaving behind warm ash, and the charred remnants of a rabbit bone someone had definitely claimed dibs on but mysteriously never eaten. Grook looked suspicious. He always looked suspicious, to be fair. But this time he was also slightly guilty, and chewing slowly. Effa narrowed her eyes at him. "Did you eat the last bit of the rabbit?" Gruck paused mid-chew. "What rabbit?" Classic Gruck. The group didn't have courts, laws, or dramatic television confessions, but social balance was delicate. When you live in a band of 10 people with no privacy, no doors, and the same 2 jokes recycled nightly, emotions run like underground roots always there, ready to trip someone. That morning the air was full of them. Not roots, tension. It began with the berries. Siku had gathered a bundle of ripe purple fruit, painstakingly collected in her tiny hands and wrapped in a leaf pouch. She left them by the fire, while she ran to chase a lizard she had no real chance of catching. When she returned, the berries were gone. She wailed like the moon had betrayed her. Everyone froze, no one confessed. Not even Grook, which was actually more suspicious. A full council was convened which, in their case, meant everyone sat around awkwardly in a circle of crossed legs and squinting eyes. There were no formal accusations, just prolonged stares, and the occasional grunt of disbelief. Aoife tried to mediate. Maybe a bird took them. Siku sniffled. A bird untied the pouch? Silence. Ro cleared his throat. Let's just agree that whoever took them is already full of shame. Gruck burped quietly. Group politics were like that. Tensions simmered over shared resources, uneven meat portions, or who snored the loudest and scared away all the small edible animals. Definitely Taka. Na had seen it happen before. One time, 2 women from a different band nearly came to blows over a gourd filled with fermented root mash, which incidentally was the closest thing they had to wine. After 3 swigs, the taller one declared the other had a chewing face. Things escalated quickly from there. In their own group, grudges formed subtly. Someone would stop handing you the least burnt meat, or not laugh at your joke, or, worst of all, stop warning you when you had a tick on your back. Na remembered once stepping over Gruck's spear by accident and snapping the shaft in half. She apologized with what could only be described as a regret grunt. Gruck said nothing, but for the next 3 days he always offered food to everyone except her, even making a show of walking around her to get to someone else. Eventually, she fixed the spear with a new piece of wood, carved his name, or, more accurately, his face with extra hair, into the shaft, and left it near his sleeping spot. They never talked about it. That's how forgiveness worked, through objects and silent gestures, not speeches. Sometimes, the tension came from nothing. Just the endless repetition of faces, sounds, and habits. Like how Tucker clicked his tongue constantly when walking, or how Ro always wanted to explain fire-making like he'd invented it, or how Aoife insisted on singing the same 4-note lullaby every night, even when everyone was wide awake and slightly annoyed. But these small gripes were part of the system. Without them, the group would be perfect. And that was unnatural. A little irritation reminded them they were human. Later that afternoon, the berry drama cooled when Siku found a fresh patch and was given full harvesting honours. Grook contributed a root he swore was better than berries, which tasted like sadness and sand. Peace, for the moment, returned. That night, a bigger disagreement began brewing. Not over food this time, but direction. Na wanted to veer west, toward the riverbed where tubers grew fat and the trees offered shade. Taka argued east, where he believed he saw signs of large game. Big antlers, big meat, he grunted. Aoife raised a fair point. You said that last time. It was a tree. Taka scowled. Tree looked like deer. Gruck mumbled. You chased it for an hour. Ro suggested a compromise. Let's go north. I brood. Na and Taka stared at him like he'd proposed walking into the sun. The decision lingered like a bad smell. There was no voting, no formal system, just the slow erosion of resistance until a leader emerged by sheer persistence or resignation. Na won out, eventually not through force but through logic. A few dry jokes, and the undeniable truth that last time they went east, half the group got bitten by ants that seemed personally offended by humans. Still, Taka sulked for the next 2 hours, stabbing the dirt with a stick and muttering about tree deer. These moments weren't just drama. They were survival negotiations. Who led the group mattered. Who shared food, who protected the weak, who noticed danger. All of it depended on social glue that couldn't crack under pressure. Too much gossip, too many grudges, and you'd find yourself alone in a world that really, really liked killing the solo types. Na knew this. That's why she watched everyone listened. She spotted when Ro was unusually quiet, which usually meant he was hurt but too proud to say so. She noticed when Aoife clutched her side after laughing, a sign her old wound was flaring up. She even pretended not to notice when Siku broke a fire-starting tool, just to give her a chance to confess later and rebuild it herself. Leadership wasn't loud, it was tuned in, especially in a group where the loudest person again. Grook once tried to convince everyone that the moon followed him because it liked his walk. But Grook, despite all his nonsense, also caught fish, made jokes, and shared his tools. So he stayed. The band, like any functional group, had to navigate the weirdness of humanity without burning down their emotional village. Petty drama, soft apologies, and the quiet miracle of not murdering each other over a handful of berries. That was the real magic. In a world with no politics, no king, no currency, and no written code, the only law was this: don't be the kind of person no one wants to share meat with. The clouds had been acting moody all day, trailing across the sky in slow, lazy patterns like giant animals who couldn't decide if they were sleepy or just annoyed. The group moved beneath them, glancing up from time to time, not for entertainment, but to study the signs. The sky was more than scenery. It was the ancient calendar, the gossip network, the warning bell, and the answer sheet to life's biggest questions like, are we going to get drenched before dinner? And, is that ominous bird circling us? Na had always watched the sky closely, not just the sun's position, but the strange slow crawl of stars at night, the shifting colours before a storm, and the weird mood swings of the moon. She didn't name these things. No one really did. But they felt them. This morning the clouds were the kind that made people pack up camp a little faster, grumble a little louder, and keep tools closer. Sky's itching, Ro muttered as he shoved a bundle of dried roots into a pouch. That was his way of saying the air felt off. He wasn't wrong. The sun itself had a weird glow to it, pale, but sharp, like it was trying to be bright without really committing. The light made the ground seem washed out, the trees taller, and everyone's mood about 7% more irritable. By midday, the wind picked up. Gruck licked a finger and held it in the air, pretending to interpret something deep. Storm coming. You say that every day, said Effa, adjusting the hide sling across her chest. Grook nodded sagely. One day I'll be right. Still, they moved quickly, westward, toward a cluster of hills where the land curved gently, and the trees were dense enough to break wind, the weather kind, although Gruck's digestive history made clarification necessary. By the time they reached the hills, the sky had already begun mumbling, distant rumbles, the kind you felt in your bones before your ears. Everyone instinctively looked up. There, tucked in the blue-grey mess above, was a flash, silent but certain. Lightning. They found a hollow between two low hills, a sort of natural bowl lined with tree roots and the smell of damp things. The group huddled there, cloaks pulled tighter, spears and baskets tucked against the rock wall. Then came the rain. Not the polite drizzle of movie montages. This was prehistoric feral rain. It slapped the earth like it was mad at it. Huge, warm drops that soaked skin in seconds and made everyone look like they'd been dunked in a river by a moody god. Siku squealed, then laughed, then squealed again. It was to her a surprise gift from the sky. To Aoife, it was the promise of a cold night and another wet foot infection. As the rain roared, Na watched the storm with a kind of respect. Not fear exactly, though storms had taken lives before, but something closer to reverence. The sky didn't ask permission, it just was. Rose sat beside her, half covered in hide, eyes on the flashes above. Remember last year? He said. Lightning hit that tall tree near the salt pool. Na nodded. Set fire to the squirrel nest. Then the squirrel caught fire and ran screaming into camp. Pause. Gruck chimed in. Best cooked squirrel I ever had. The storm passed as suddenly as it came. The wind eased. The trees stopped dancing. The sky, now washed and a little embarrassed, began peeling back into patches of blue. Everyone emerged from the hollow like wet laundry dripping, annoyed, but still standing. Siku tried to catch the last raindrops in her mouth. Gruck shook himself like a dog. Aoife wrung out her braid with a noise that sounded like a curse in 3 dialects. They began drying their things, lays of hide on warm rocks, baskets emptied and propped open. The sun, as if trying to apologize, reappeared with an awkward brightness. Later that evening, as twilight crept in, they built another fire, this time with wood that hissed and spit from the damp. Around the flickering flame, attention shifted upward again. The sky was different at night. It opened up like a secret, full of glittering whispers. Stars blinked into view, first one, then 2, then thousands. A milky band arched overhead, a splash of soft light so wide and strange it made even Grook pause mid-burp. Siku lay on her back, pointing upward. That one moved. Ro chuckled. It's a sky wanderer. Some of them move. Why? Ro shrugged. Because they can. There were no stories written down, no legends etched into bark. But over time, the group had developed patterns, ideas, little whispered rules about what the sky meant. Bright moon, better hunting at night. Orange sunset, dry day tomorrow. Stars flickering fast, winds about to change. One time, Aoife claimed she saw 2 stars collide. She said it meant twins would be born soon. She was right. Gruck's sister had 2 babies a few weeks later. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe the sky knew things. To them, the sky wasn't up. It was around. It was part of them. Reflected in water. Echoed in dreams. Nar often dreamed of falling into stars. Waking up from those dreams left her feeling small and very awake. Before sleep took them, Nar found herself tracing a shape in the dirt. A crooked line, then a dot, then another. It matched a pattern she'd seen overhead stars aligned in a shape like a long, bent arm. What's that? Siku asked. A hunter, Nar said. Chasing a deer. Where's the deer? Nar pointed to another cluster. There. Siku frowned. The hunter's slow, Nar smiled. The deer's clever. Aye, that was the kind of wisdom the sky offered. Slow hunters, clever prey, glowing dots that promised everything and explained nothing. Long before maps, clocks, or compasses, there was just the sky, mysterious, judgmental, poetic, and if you listened long enough, it sometimes whispered back. You wouldn't think that staying clean was a priority in a world where people routinely smeared blood on their cheeks and counted a good day as one where they didn't fall in a hole. But somehow, it was. Sort of. Hygiene, in 10,000 BCE, wasn't about scent-free moisturizers or dental floss. It was more about not dying from rashes, bugs, or weird infections that made you smell like sadness. Nar stood in a slow-moving stream, water up to her knees, scrubbing her arms with a fist-sized rock. Not aggressively, just enough to lift off the dirt and mystery stains. The cold bit at her legs, but the sun overhead made it bearable. Around her, reeds rustled gently, hiding frogs, eels, and, hopefully, nothing with teeth. Nearby, Siku splashed like she was trying to wrestle the water into submission. She smeared wet sand across her legs with a focused expression. It makes the itchy stop, she announced. She was right. In their version of skincare, the secret ingredient was abrasion. Exfoliation was less a beauty ritual and more, let's see if scrubbing this with mud stops it from oozing. Effa had a different strategy. Smoke. After washing, she often stood near the fire, waving the smoke around her body like a ritual. It wasn't spiritual. It was mosquito armor. The bugs hated smoke more than logic, and if you waved it just right, you smelled like a burnt bush for hours. It was magnificent. There was also the ash trick. Nar sometimes rubbed cool ashes into her hair to absorb grease. The effect? Less shine, more volume, and an earthy aroma that screamed swamp witch, but in a good way. Teeth were another matter. They didn't brush, not really, but they did chew bark, roots, fibrous plants. It helped clean the teeth, sort of. Roe favoured a particular twig that, when chewed just right, splayed into a mini brush. He swore it kept his breath fresh. Everyone else swore he was lying. Still, their teeth, though worn and chipped, weren't as bad as you'd think. Sugar wasn't a regular guest in their diet, and soft foods were rare. You either chewed something tough or went hungry. Nature was the dentist, and her drills were made of seeds and roasted bone. Gruck, however, had developed a bold new hygiene theory. Crocodile poop. "I swear," he said one afternoon, smearing a little on his arm. "Keeps the bugs away. Also keeps people away," Aoife replied dryly. To be fair, crocodile dung had its fans in other bands. Not because it smelled great, it didn't, but because it was weirdly effective against skin parasites. Possibly because nothing wanted to be near crocodile dung, not even parasites. The rest of the group stuck to more conventional methods. Clay masks, which they called falling and landing on your face, river rinses, and the occasional smoke sauna, by which they meant sitting in a pit full of embers and sweating until you hallucinated. And then there was the hair. No scissors, no mirrors, no dry shampoo, just whatever happened to grow, tangle, and occasionally host a family of lice. Nar kept hers braided tight. It reduced bugs and stopped it from whipping her in the face during windstorms. Roe wore his in a perpetual half-matted tangle. Aoife shaved part of hers with a sharpened shell because she claimed it made her faster. It didn't, but it gave her a fierce look. They did care about grooming, in their own low-tech, high-effort way. Gruck spent a solid 20 minutes each day, plucking mites out of his leg hair with a tiny stick. Was it useful? Maybe. Was it satisfying? Absolutely. Every few days, the group declared an unofficial cleaning day. This usually meant stopping near a stream, spreading hides to dry, and trying to convince Gruck to wash without turning it into performance art. The cleaning ritual wasn't just about hygiene, it was psychological. When the grime of travel layered too thickly, it weighed down the spirit. A good rinse made you feel new, like maybe the world wasn't trying to stick to your skin quite so hard. That afternoon, as the group sprawled beside the water, Nar found a smooth patch of red clay. Curious, she dabbed some on her face, spreading it in messy streaks. It felt cool, grounding. Siku gasped. "You look like a tree ghost." Nar smiled. "Maybe I am." Soon, others joined. Roe smeared a line down his nose. Gruck painted his entire face and chest, then ran in circles declaring he was the beast king of the river, until he tripped over a rock and got a nosebleed. It added to the look, honestly. They laughed, even Aoife, who rarely laughed without it sounding like a warning. For a moment, they weren't hunters, foragers, or survival machines. They were just people, covered in clay and river water, making art out of cleanliness. That night, with their skins scrubbed and their scents temporarily improved, they slept more deeply. Dreams came easier when the bugs weren't biting and your hair wasn't stuck to your neck. No perfumes, no products, just cold water, warm fire, and the never-ending quest to avoid smelling like feet and despair. It wasn't glamorous, but in a world without soap, even crocodile poop had its place. The group found the bones at sunrise. They weren't fresh, scattered in the underbrush. They were half covered in leaves, crusted with old dirt, and gnawed at the ends. The kind of bones you'd normally ignore, unless you were really hungry, or dangerously curious. But these ones had a human shape to them, long femurs, a curved rib cage, a skull cracked like a split melon. Siku stared at it too long. Nar gently turned her away. Death wasn't rare. It stalked them daily in the form of cliffs, illness, large angry animals, and the occasional very bad decision involving mushrooms. But coming face to face with a known body was different. The bones had been someone. Nar recognized the bone necklace caught on a nearby branch. A string of small, smooth teeth. 2 belonged to a fox. 1, probably, to the man himself. His name had been Jaw. Old by their standards, maybe 35. He'd wandered off 2 moons ago, mumbling about a bird he heard calling his name. They'd assumed he'd died, or joined another group, or both. In this world, Disappearance was a kind of casual death. Now there he was, or what was left of him, scattered among roots, forgotten by all but the wind. Ro and Taka began collecting the bones. Not all, some were missing. Eaten. Taken. But they gathered what they could into a rough pile. Aoife found a shoulder blade, bleached white and hollow. She placed it gently beside the skull. Siku asked the question everyone thinks but doesn't say. Is he still here? Na didn't answer. Not directly. She crouched beside the bones and placed a flat stone over the skull. A gesture, a lid, a goodbye. They didn't bury him. Not here. The ground was too hard, the tools too few. But they did what they could. A cairn. A low mound of rocks. Symbols carved into bark. Nothing elaborate. Just lines, spirals, a crude shape of a bird. We give them back, Ro said. To the world. That was the closest thing to a prayer anyone would hear that day. In a world without organized religion or codified beliefs, death was still sacred. Not in the sense of temples or gods, but in silence, in ritual, in remembering. When someone died, the group changed. The air shifted. There was a gap in the circle, a space no one sat in, not for weeks. Names were rarely spoken after someone passed, not out of fear, but out of deep respect. You carried the dead with you in objects, in silence, in your dreams. Aoife still wore a strip of hide from her brother's cloak, woven into her braid. He'd fallen from a rock face years ago. No one found his body. But she said he visited her in dreams, when she slept near running water. Taka, less poetic, claimed his grandmother now lived in a squirrel. No one questioned him. Na, for her part, didn't believe in ghosts. She believed in echoes. Movements, habits, patterns that outlived the person. The way Jaw used to cough twice before speaking. The way he cracked pine nuts with one eye squinted, as if anticipating an explosion. She still cracked nuts that way, without thinking. That was how the dead survived. Later, they found a small grove nearby and decided to stay the night. It wasn't because of Jaw exactly, but no one wanted to keep moving. Grief was heavy. It made your legs slow and your breath shallow. That evening they lit 2 fires, one for warmth, one for memory. The second fire wasn't used to cook or smoke away bugs. It was just there, flickering, holding space. Aoife tossed a small carved bone into the flames. Ro added a strand of grass from Jaw's favourite sleeping spot. Even Gruck, who once claimed the dead were just old meat, placed a feather at the fire's edge and walked away quietly. Siku whispered, "What happens when we die?" Na poked at the embers, watching sparks drift upward like confused stars. "We go back." "Back where?" Na shrugged. To everything. It wasn't an answer. But it was enough. That night, the group lay closer than usual. No one said it, but they all felt the same thought curling beneath their ribs. Someday, it'll be me. Maybe you'd die in sleep, gently. Maybe a predator would make it quick. Or maybe you'd just walk away one day and not come back, like Jaw. Either way, someone would gather your bones. Someone would remember your laugh, your walk, your weird obsession with fish traps. And that was enough. There was no fear of death, only fear of dying alone, unremembered. In the middle of the night, a fox barked somewhere in the distance. Siku stirred and reached for Na, who wrapped an arm around her and didn't let go. In the darkness, Ro's fire burned low, a single orange eye watching the sky. No grave markers, no tombstones. Just a fire, some rocks, and the soft, slow hum of a people who never needed to speak grief aloud to feel it. The morning would come, the wind would shift, they would move on, but Jaw would come with them, in gestures, in memories, in the long, gentle silence between footsteps. The air was thick with the promise of sweat. Everyone could feel it, the way the trees had gone quiet, the stillness of the wind, the distant dust trail that might have been breeze or something large kicking up dirt on the plains. Either way, it meant one thing. Big hunt, not berry gathering, not frog chasing, not digging up tubers while pretending they were meat-flavoured. This was full band. Sharpen your sticks, wear your serious face kind of hunting. A herd had passed through recently. Mammoth, maybe. Or something equally large and hooved and delicious, if it didn't trample you into pudding. Nar crouched beside the faint imprints in the dirt, fingers brushing over the tracks. Wide, deep, heavy. She made a soft grunt, the kind that loosely translated to, "Big thing, many feet, still fresh, we might die." Ro nodded. South, toward the grass line. Gruck chimed in, excited as ever. "Maybe we ride it this time." No one responded. The group prepared quickly. Spears were checked, stone tips tied tight with sinew, shafts straightened over flame to harden. Nets were gathered, woven reeds, surprisingly strong, but only good for guiding or slowing, not stopping. You didn't stop a mammoth. You inconvenienced it long enough to jab it and hope you weren't the one it hated most. Effa painted streaks of clay on her arms. Not for luck, just to look terrifying. She always claimed the animal's respected confidence. Ro claimed she just liked looking like a furious root vegetable. Siku wasn't part of the hunt. She stayed behind with the smaller ones and Aoife's oldest. She sulked, but understood. Her day would come, assuming no one got squashed into decorative paste. They moved at dawn. Through the trees, across a dried, streamed, up to the ridge that looked out over the plain, and there, in the shimmering heat haze, was the herd. Not mammoth. Bison. Dozens of them, shaggy, broad-shouldered, chewing grass with the patience of gods and the muscle of tanks. A good sign, easier than mammoths. Still dangerous, but doable. Nar squinted. Wind's wrong. The others didn't need further explanation. If the wind was blowing from their backs toward the herd, the bison would smell them. And once they smelled you, they usually ran, or worse, charged. Which was the same as running, just with more revenge. They waited, watched, adjusted their approach, creeping around the ridge to come from the west. One misstep, and the whole thing would collapse into chaos. Again, the last hunt had ended, with Grook running from a wounded elk, tripping, and somehow getting tangled in his own net. The elk had stopped to stare, probably out of sheer confusion. They'd eaten well that night, but Grook never lived it down. Now, the plan was simpler. Flush a few bison toward the rocky funnel where others would wait with spears. No drama, no glory, just teamwork, and hopefully a good meal. Nar, Ro, Tarka and Gruck crept into position. Grass hissed underfoot. The bison grazed, unaware. Then, like a switch flipped, the wind shifted. The herd stopped chewing. "Go," Nar whispered. They sprang from the grass line, shouting, waving branches, throwing small stones not to hurt but to panic. The bison bolted, hooves pounding like drums against the earth. Dust exploded into the air. Gruck tripped again, but this time recovered with a flourish that impressed no one. The bison barreled toward the funnel. Ro and Aoife were waiting. The first beast entered the narrow path, forced to slow. That was the moment. Ro stepped out, spear ready, steady hands, timing everything. He aimed for the chest, through, and missed by a hair. The bison kept coming. Nar jumped in from the side, jabbing low. The tip struck muscle, not fatal, but enough to slow it further. Ro reloaded, stabbing again. This time, the spear hit true. The animal bellowed, stumbled, then collapsed in a tangle of limbs and snorts. The second bison turned at the last moment and escaped. The third crashed into a net, flailing, tearing through, but not before Aoife landed a deep cut behind its shoulder. Eventually, silence returned, broken only by the groans of the dying bison and the gasping breaths of the hunters. One down, one injured and fled, the others gone. It was enough. They approached the body carefully. Nar placed a hand on its side, still warm, still twitching. She whispered something, not words, more like a shape of breath and thanks. They all had their own version of that. A small acknowledgement, not quite guilt, not quite gratitude, just notice. Ro began butchering quickly. Tools out, meat cut in long strips, organs removed, blood pooled in the dirt, steaming. Nothing was wasted. Even the bones would be split for marrow. Grook tried to carry the liver and nearly dropped it. "Heavy," he complained. "It's full of everything you're missing," Aoife said. "Strength, brains, coordination. Taka arrived late, having circled too wide. "Did I miss the action?" "Yes," said Na, handing him a chunk of stomach. "Here, you get gut duty." They worked for hours, hands slick, flies buzzing. Back at camp, smoke rose signal to bring the meat. Siku saw it first. She ran to meet them, eyes wide, face lit with awe. "You got it?" Na nodded. "We got one." Siku jumped in excitement, then gagged at the smell. "It stinks," Rose smiled. "That's the smell of not being hungry." By nightfall, meat roasted over flames. Fat dripped and hissed into the fire. The air was thick with the scent of salt, smoke, and accomplishment. The band sat close. No one spoke for a long time. Then Grook raised his bone cup filled with fermented root mash and said, "To bison that zig instead of zag." A round of grunts, half cheers. A full stomach made everything softer. That night, they slept deeply. Muscles sore, bellies full. Feet twitching in dreams of hooves and thunder. Hunting wasn't a sport. It was negotiation with death. You offered risk in exchange for survival. And if you were lucky, you walked away carrying food instead of wounds. But the next morning, the bones of the bison lay near the fire. A reminder, life in the wild didn't give trophies. Just another day earned. The entrance to the cave yawned like the mouth of something old and sleepy. A jagged crack in a hill, shaded by crooked trees and cloaked in the damp breath of earth. Na stood at the edge, squinting into the dark. The air smelled of stone, smoke, and mystery, her favourite combination. They had stumbled across it while chasing a wounded boar that had, in a final act of rudeness, bled its way into the rocks and vanished. No boar. But they'd found something better. A place that pulled you in. Inside it was cool and silent except for the occasional drip of water from unseen heights. The cave was deep farther than expected, and wide enough for the whole group to walk without ducking, though Gruck did hit his head on a low-hanging bit of ceiling and immediately tried to fight it. The deeper they went, the more the world outside fell away. No wind, no sun, just the scrape of feet, the wheeze of breath, and the growing sense that they weren't the first to enter. They weren't. Na found the handprint first, high on the wall, outlined in faded red clay. A human hand, 5 fingers, slightly splayed, like someone had pressed it there long ago and said, "I am here." Siku gasped. "It's like yours," she whispered, holding her own hand up beside it. Smaller, but close. They began finding more scattered across the walls like whispers. Hands in red, black, yellow. Some missing fingers. Some tiny, child-sized. Some layered atop each other like a crowd reaching through time. Further in, the walls changed. Patterns appeared. Swirls. Lines. A herd of deer painted in charcoal and ochre. A single bison, mid-charge, its legs blurred as if moving. A figure vague and stretched, half animal, half human, holding what looked like a branch or antlers. Siku stared in wide-eyed awe. Gruck muttered something about magic goat men. Aoife said nothing, but her eyes were locked on the figure like it had called her name. The group sat down there, in the belly of the hill, with only a small fire between them and the ink-black dark. The paintings flickered in the light, shadows dancing over ancient scenes. Na felt the weight of years pressing around her, not heavy, but present, like the cave remembered everything. "Why?" Ro asked finally. "Why paint all this?" Na didn't answer right away. She stood and moved toward a blank patch of wall. Reaching into a pouch, she pulled out crushed berry pulp and a clump of charcoal. Then she placed her hand on the wall and blew. Berry juice sprayed gently around her fingers, leaving a bright red outline. Siku gasped again. "Now it's you." Na turned back. Maybe that's the reason. There was silence. A kind of reverence. Then Grook loudly sneezed and ruined it. But the moment had landed. This was more than art. It was memory, communication, maybe even a kind of magic. Before words, before books, before bedtime podcasts, there was this. Stories in shapes and colours, told in firelight to remind future humans that they had been here, that they had mattered. Aoife pointed at the bison. Hunt story, Ro nodded. The one we never caught. Siku squinted at a cluster of spirals. That's when the river twisted. Tucker frowned at a humanoid figure with too many legs. That's just weird, Gruck offered. Maybe he was dancing. They weren't wrong. These were visual histories. Records of fear, triumph, hunger, and possibly some recreational fungus use. No one could be sure, but certain parts of the cave definitely had bad trip energy. As the fire popped and hissed, Na felt a strange shift in her thoughts, like the images were seeping into her, dragging old memories to the surface. She remembered stories from her childhood. The cave bear legend, the time the moon vanished for 3 nights and came back crooked, the old woman who talked to stars. Maybe they were lies, or dreams, but they were remembered, and that made them real. Eventually, Ro stood, and painted too. He drew a crooked spear with a blob at the end. "It's me," he explained proudly. "It looks like a tree with legs," Siku said. "Exactly." Then everyone joined. Clay, spit, berry, ash applied with fingers, sticks, and enthusiasm. Aoife painted the sun with angry rays. Grook tried to draw himself and ended up creating what looked like a frightened boar with enormous ears. Still, it was beautiful. In the flicker of flame, they laughed, played, remembered. The walls echoed with something more than sound-shared intention. A record not meant for gods, but for each other. Not everything needed purpose. Sometimes you painted a bison because it made you feel powerful. Sometimes you outlined your hand because you wanted proof you existed. And sometimes you just liked the way red clay felt between your fingers. Before long they were tired. Smoke coiled in the air like a quiet spirit. They lay down on soft moss and watched the firelight shift across painted walls. Siku curled beside Na. "Do the pictures ever change?" Na blinked slowly. "Maybe they do. When we're not looking." Outside, the night howled. Wind pushed through the trees. The sky spun overhead. But inside the cave, time had no meaning. There was only fire, memory, and the heartbeat of a story written not with words, but with fingers. The first sound Na heard in the morning wasn't the wind or the birds. It was screaming, not the good kind, like, "Look what I found," or "This squirrel is surprisingly bitey." This was the unmistakable wail of a child who had, once again, stuck something unwise into an orifice. "Leaf in my nose," came the squeal. Siku, barefoot, furious, and covered in dirt, stomped into the clearing like a tiny warrior returning from a poorly thought-out battle. Na looked at her, blinked, and handed her a bit of root to chew. The tribe's version of a multi-purpose cure. Teething relief, mild distraction, possibly edible. Children were everywhere. Okay, not everywhere, just 5 of them. But 5 small humans in a nomadic band was enough to make it feel like someone had installed chaos on the forest floor. They screamed, climbed, wandered, poked, peed in inconvenient places, asked endless questions, and occasionally helped out just long enough to seem useful. Siku was the oldest of the current horde, which basically made her the de facto leader. She wore the title proudly, often assigning tasks to the others with the confidence of someone who once told a rock to guard a fire. "This is Kiki, she watches the meat. This is Wob, he throws rocks at hawks. And this," she pointed to a half-eaten stick, "is Stick. He's a weapon." Grook nodded solemnly. Stick has potential. Raising children before cities, before structure, schooling or snack schedules wasn't a 2-parent job. It was a group activity. No one said babysitting. That would imply someone had a choice. If a kid sat down next to you, congratulations, you were now responsible for their survival, education, emotional well-being, and making sure they didn't lick poison bugs. Effa, with 3 of her own, barely flinched when one of them bit another. She gave the biter a look that could make a bear reconsider its life choices. No yelling, no big scene, just pure prehistoric mom energy. Na remembered when Siku was born how the group slowed their travel, found safer places to camp, shifted priorities for a tiny, wrinkled creature who communicated only by screaming and pooping. Somehow, Siku had survived, grown, and now climbed trees with terrifying speed and no backup plan. There was no official school, But learning happened constantly, by observation, imitation, trial, and a lot of error. A child who didn't learn quickly might not live long, but that didn't mean the learning was boring. Take yesterday, for example. Na had been cracking open a marrow bone with a heavy stone. Siku watched, took her own tiny bone, and attempted the same. She missed entirely, bashed her thumb, and made a noise that was half rage, half betrayal. Grook offered her a different bone. "Try a rounder one, less bounce." Siku eyed him. "Why do you know that?" "Experience." "Why do you have experience hitting yourself with bones?" "Unclear." Later that day, the kids spent hours following a beetle, convinced it was leading them to a secret cave. It wasn't. It was just a very confused beetle. But they learned about movement, about terrain, about patience. They also learned about frustration. "Why can't we catch the sun?" Wob once asked, sobbing after a failed attempt to trap sunlight in a gourd. Na had no answer. So she told him a story about a creature that did catch the sun once and exploded from the inside out. Wob was satisfied. Terrified, but satisfied. Children weren't just learners. They were walking, loud, dangerous memory sponges. Everything they saw, they copied. If you made a mistake, they would repeat it, with enthusiasm. Siku once saw Grook scratch his armpit and declare, "Victory!" She did it for a week. Still, for all their noise and danger, kids were treasured. Not in a sentimental greeting card way, but in a deeply practical, soul-rooted way. Children were the future, in the most literal sense. The next hunters, gatherers, firekeepers, and fishnet weavers. If they didn't make it, the band didn't make it. So yes, they were annoying. But they were also everything. At night, the children curled up in the center of the group, safe in a ring of adults. Siku often fell asleep mid-sentence, hands still clutching her latest invention, a pouch filled with feathers, bark, and the vague hope it would fly. Aoife once whispered, "They dream first, then we follow." Ro, who had just finished wiping berry paste off Wob's forehead, said, "I dream of silence." Na looked at the sleeping children, muddy, bruised, alive. They were miniature humans, full of wonder and recklessness, shaped by firelight and mosquito bites. And every day, they got a little better at being alive, which, in this world, was the biggest lesson of all. The river was gone. Na stared at the cracked earth where water once ran, her toes curling against dry mud that crumbled like old bone. A few patches of damp remained, but only in the shadowy creases. The rest of the stream was a memory one that still smelled faintly of fish, rot and disappointment. She knelt and touched the ground. Warm. Too warm. The kind of warmth that whispered of change, and not the good kind. No frogs chirped, no reeds danced, no shimmer of water reflecting sky, just heat and silence. The group stood behind her, staring. This river had been part of their seasonal cycle for years, a dependable stop along the way. They drank from it, bathed in it, foraged along its banks. It had been their path, their pantry, their landmark, and now? Just dirt. Maybe it moved, Gruck suggested, hopefully. "It's not a bear," Aoife muttered. Tucker squinted at the sky. "The clouds aren't right." He wasn't wrong. The sky had been too clear for too long. Dry winds, no afternoon rains, no mosquito clouds. It was peaceful, in a deeply suspicious way. Siku kicked at the dust. Now what? No one answered immediately, because now they had to decide. The river dictated their movement. It gave direction. Without it, they needed new logic, new water, new food, new protection. Wandering aimlessly in summer heat was the quickest way to become a cautionary tale told around some other group's fire. They set up a temporary camp in the shade of a bluff, overlooking the dead river, hoping for clues. That night, they watched the sky again and listened for the whisper of distant streams. Nothing came, just dry wind and a restless moon. Na couldn't sleep. She sat near the fire, poking at embers, mind circling. There was another water source. Farther south. Riskier. Through unfamiliar woods and territory where the land turned strange. but she'd heard of it through stories passed around fires like secrets. A great bend in the world, where water carved stone and animals gathered like stars. She told the others at dawn. They debated, of course. Ro wanted to wait. Tucker thought it was a waste of strength. Grook was fully on board after Na mentioned there might be new kinds of birds. But in the end, they trusted her. Because Na paid attention. They packed with less than usual. No reason to carry expectations on their backs. Just food for a few days, tools, and the stubborn hope that something waited ahead. The journey south was rougher than usual. The forest was thicker, choked with vines and insects that bit in creative, vengeful ways. The game was scarce. The ground was dry. Even the ants seemed angrier. Siku asked, "Is this the right way?" Na nodded, but with less certainty each time. One night, they ran out of water. No one panicked. But the silence between them grew tight, like a rope being pulled. Ro climbed a ridge the next morning and came down grinning. "I heard frogs." Frogs meant water, unless they were hallucinations. But Na trusted his ears. By midday, they found it. Not a river exactly, but a spring-fed pool tucked inside a bowl of rock, deep in the trees. The water shimmered in the sunlight like a secret treasure. They ran to it, dropped everything, and plunged in. Na waded out slowly, letting the coolness wrap around her legs. She bent to drink carefully, tasting with her tongue first, always wary of sickness, but the water was sweet, cold, alive. They stayed 2 nights. It wasn't home. It didn't replace the old river. But it reminded them that the land always had something somewhere that could sustain them. Still, the change lingered. Even when they moved on, following the trickle that flowed from the pool deeper into the southlands, they talked about the missing river, about how the world could shift without warning. Aoife said it had happened before. Long ago, when she was a girl, a meadow turned to sand in a single summer. "The earth breathes," she said. "Sometimes it exhales too hard." Tucker suggested the river would come back. "Maybe it's just hiding." Siku whispered to the wind, "Come back soon." Na didn't offer theories, she simply observed. The land was changing. Maybe it always had. But now, she felt it. The river's absence was a lesson about movement, about humility, about the quiet power of nature to say no more. That evening the stars came out slow and shy. The group sat near their new stream, skin still damp, fire low, hearts quiet. They didn't talk much, just listened to the trickle of water, the hum of bugs, the soft rustle of trees returning to their nightly gossip. The world had shifted beneath their feet, but they were still walking, still adapting, still together. And in this life, that was all you could ask for. It started with the smoke, a thin, straight line rising from the trees in the distance, too steady to be natural, too far to be theirs. The group spotted it from a ridge as they moved through a wide valley filled with golden grass and ankle-twisting surprises. Na squinted at the plume, tracking its rise against the pale morning sky. "Another group?" Ro asked, already reaching for his spear. "Maybe," Na said. "Or a very ambitious bird." "Oh." They approached slowly, with all the caution of people who had seen new people go very wrong. Encounters ranged from friendly trading to rock throwing, to extremely confusing dances that might have been either welcome or warning. But curiosity was stronger than caution this time. The group was tired. They'd been following this river, the new one, for weeks now, and the world had begun to feel oddly different. The air carried more smells. The paths looked trampled. And then they saw it. A clearing. A wide, flat meadow cradled by 3 hills. In its centre, people. Not just a small band like theirs, but dozens. Maybe more. Children, elders, fire pits, bundles of food stacked neatly, hides stretched for drying, stones laid out in geometric patterns like the land had been combed. Shelters. Not the usual lean-tos or travelling nests. These were bigger, sturdier, some even looked semi-permanent. Wood frames packed with mud. Hide roofs lashed with cordage. Na stood silently, unsure whether she was witnessing genius or madness. Siku gasped. "It's like a tiny village." And it was. The group had stumbled into a seasonal gathering, a place where multiple bands met, shared stories, exchanged goods, gossiped, mated, argued, and sometimes invented new ways to cook roots. It wasn't a city, not even close. But it smelled like the beginning of something. They were welcomed, cautiously at first, then warmly when one of the elders recognized Aoife from a past fire meet. Someone handed Grook a roasted bird, which he accepted with the seriousness of a king receiving tribute. Nar watched everything with a quiet mind. This was different. People were staying here, not just for a few days, but for moons at a time. They had storage pits, traps left in place for weeks, children playing in the same spot 2 days in a row. She wasn't sure whether to feel amazed or claustrophobic. She wandered through the camp, taking it all in. There was a group gathered around a fire, telling stories with actual props, painted stones and carved figurines. One man showed off a long bone with grooves on it. He ran a stick across it and made music. Not just noise. Actual music. Rhythm. Melody. Ro, sitting beside her, muttered, "We've been living under rocks." Nar nodded, not entirely in agreement. "We've been moving under rocks." Oh, because that was the truth. Movement was their safety, their identity. These people, they were building something heavier, rooted. The air smelled like plans. Aoife looked around and sighed. Too many people. Someone's always mad about something. She wasn't wrong. Even in the short time they stayed, Nar saw minor conflicts. Over space, over shared food, over the rules for whose child was allowed to throw rocks at whose goat. The more people you clump together, the more room you make for drama. But there was also beauty. Someone had painted the side of a shelter with ochre and ash. Swirls of rivers, hills, stars. Like the cave paintings, but out here exposed, shared. Siku traced the patterns with her fingers and whispered, "It's like they're trying to hold the land still." Grook invented a new game with some children involving stones, sticks, and incomprehensible rules. It ended in a pile of limbs and laughter. Taka traded a flint blade for a smoked lizard. He was thrilled. "It tastes like wet fire," he said, happily chewing. Nar felt something she couldn't name. A warmth. A quiet tension. Was this how it started? The slide toward cities? Toward people staying too long, stacking things, counting things, arguing over things? Or was it just another way to survive? When they finally left after 3 days of sharing, learning, resting, the sky was soft with dawn mist. The large camp faded behind them, voices echoing faintly. Back on the trail, Nar walked slower. Not from fatigue, but from thought. Ro walked beside her, brushing his shoulder against hers lightly. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" "Probably not," Nar replied. "I was thinking we should build a house made of bison skulls." "Definitely not." He grinned. Siku skipped ahead, singing something she made up on the spot. Aoife walked behind with a bag of traded roots. Gruck carried an entire gourd of fermented mash and was muttering what sounded like marriage vows to it. The group moved on, but something had shifted, not just in the world, but in them. They'd seen a new kind of life, one where people stopped running, started building, began staying. It was close, tangible, almost theirs. Almost, but not yet. They weren't ready to settle. Not yet. There were still paths to follow, rivers to meet, stars to walk beneath. Still time to live between the trees, to move like ghosts across open land. Still time before everything changed. And for now, that was enough. And now, let's slow everything down. Let the fire die to its last ember. Let the stories settle like dust on warm skin. Let the air soften, the way it does just before sleep finds you. They're still walking, you know, somewhere. Across a land that hasn't yet been divided. Beneath a sky that still listens. Through rivers that don't know, they'll be damned someday. Nar is probably leading. Rose still just behind her, making jokes that barely qualify as sentences. Siku's running ahead, wild as ever, her laughter bouncing between the trees. Gruck? He's probably arguing with a stick again. And Aoife. She's watching them all. Holding space. Holding time. This is where it all began. Before walls, before maps, before someone got the bright idea to build a city and charge for water. They lived, they laughed, they forgot to clean their ears, but they watched the sky, and they told stories, and they remembered things with their hands on cave walls, in fire dances, in the shape of footprints left behind. And now, here you are, quiet, still, wrapped in a blanket, maybe, breathing slow, because even though you're thousands of years away from that fire, something ancient in you remembers it, misses it, maybe even longs for it. It's okay. We carry them in us. The boring sapiens, the fire watchers, the path makers, the story people. Close your eyes. Let their world blur into yours. You can walk with them, just for a little while longer. The stars are out, and the night is listening. End of script. Good night.